The front door slammed open. Elena! No answer. Victor Carter stepped inside the house, loosening his tie.
Elena?
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 The hallway lights were on. The living room lamp glowed softly. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Then he heard it. A faint sound. Victor froze. The sound came again, struggling, from the living room. He rushed forward and pushed the door open. Elena! He stopped mid-sentence. Claire, the nanny, was tied to a chair. Her wrists were bound with rope. Tape covered her mouth. Her eyes were wide with terror. Victor stared for half a second. What the hell? He rushed to her and ripped the tape away. Claire gasped for air. Mr. Carter! Victor grabbed the rope and began untying it. What happened? Claire's hands were shaking violently. He took him. Victor's body went still. Who? Claire looked toward the staircase. Lucas! Victor's voice sharpened. What do you mean he took Lucas? But footsteps suddenly pounded through the hallway. Elena! Victor shouted. She rushed into the room, breathless. I heard yelling. Then she saw Claire tied to the chair. Her face went pale. What happened? Claire burst into tears. He took Lucas! Elena's heart seemed to stop. No! Claire grabbed her arm desperately. A man broke in! Elena staggered backward. Where is my son? Claire shook her head violently. He carried him out. Elena ran for the stairs. Lucas! Victor followed quickly. Elena, wait! But she was already racing up the steps. Lucas! She burst into the bedroom. The bed was empty. The blankets were on the floor. The window was open. Cold night air rushed into the room. Elena stared at the empty bed. No. Victor stepped into the doorway. His eyes scanned the room. Then he noticed something on the floor. A small sneaker. Lucas's sneaker. Victor slowly picked it up. Behind him, Elena whispered, Where is he? Her voice trembled. Victor, where is our son? Victor didn't answer. He walked to the window and looked down into the dark yard. Nothing. Elena rushed to him. We have to call the police. Victor turned slowly. Wait. Elena stared at him. Our son is gone. Victor's voice stayed calm. We need to think. Elena shook her head. There's nothing to think about. She grabbed her phone with shaking hands and dialed. My son is missing, she cried into the phone. Someone took him. Victor watched silently as she spoke to the dispatcher. Outside, the quiet street looked exactly the same as it had an hour ago. No broken gate, no noise, no witnesses, just darkness. Elena ended the call and sank onto the bed. They're sending officers. Victor nodded slowly. Downstairs, Claire was still crying. Elena, she called weakly. Elena rushed back down the stairs. Victor followed. Claire grabbed her hands the moment she reached her. I'm so sorry. Elena shook her head. What happened? Claire struggled to breathe evenly. Someone knocked on the door. Victor folded his arms. And you opened it. Claire nodded. He said there was a package. Victor muttered. Unbelievable. Claire continued. I barely opened the door before he pushed it. Elena whispered. Did you see his face? Claire shook her head. He was wearing a mask. Victor asked. Did he say anything? Claire swallowed. Only one thing. What? Elena asked urgently. Claire whispered. Go, don't scream. Elena covered her mouth. Victor looked toward the front door thoughtfully. How long ago? Claire answered. Maybe 10 minutes before you got home. Elena's voice cracked. Lucas must be terrified. Victor walked to the window and looked outside again. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Elena sat down slowly. Her hands were trembling. Victor turned toward her. They'll find him. But his voice sounded strangely steady. Elena looked up. What if they don't? Victor didn't answer. The sound of police sirens grew louder. Red and blue lights flashed across the windows. Moments later, officers rushed inside. A tall detective stepped forward. Mr. Carter? Victor nodded. Yes. I'm Detective Harris. Harris looked around the room quickly. Who found the child missing? Elena raised her hand weakly. I did. Harris nodded. It's tell me everything. Claire repeated the story while officers examined the doors and windows. Harris crouched near the front door lock. Then he stood again slowly. Interesting. Victor frowned. What? Harris pointed toward the door. No sign of forced entry, Claire whispered. He pushed the door open. Harris nodded. So the door wasn't locked? Claire hesitated. I thought it was. Victor sighed. That's helpful. Harris turned to Elena. Mrs. Carter, does anyone have a reason to harm your son? Elena hesitated. Victor noticed. Answer the detective, he said quietly. Elena whispered, maybe. Harris lifted his pen. Who? Elena swallowed. Someone from my past. Victor's eyes narrowed. Harris asked, name? Elena spoke softly. Adrian Hale. Victor turned slowly toward her. Your ex-husband. Elena nodded. Harris wrote the name down. Does he live nearby? No, Elena said. But he showed up tonight. Victor's voice sharpened. You didn't tell me that. Elena looked at him helplessly. It didn't seem important. Harris looked between them. Where did you see him? At the charity event. Victor crossed his arms. Convenient timing. Harris nodded slowly. Yes, it is. An officer suddenly entered the room. Detective Harris. Harris turned. What is it? The officer held up a small tablet. We found this in the driveway. Elena gasped. That's Lucas's. Harris took it. Why would the kidnapper drop this? The officer shrugged. It was near Mr. Carter's car. Victor frowned slightly. So? Harris studied him quietly. Outside, another police radio crackled. Detective Harris, we've got something. Harris grabbed the radio. Ian, go ahead. A black sedan was seen leaving this street around the time of the kidnapping. Elena's heart skipped. Victor didn't move. Harris asked, Did you get the plate? The voice answered, Yes. The room fell silent. Harris asked, Who does it belong to? The officer's voice replied over the radio. A woman named Sophia Grant. Victor's expression changed for just a second. Elena noticed, and suddenly, a terrible thought began forming in her mind. If you're hooked already, take a moment to like the video and tell me in the comments. Do you think Adrian took Lucas? Or is something far more dangerous happening inside this family? Because the truth behind this kidnapping is only beginning to unfold. Elena stared at Victor. Sophia? Victor frowned. Yes. You're Sophia. Victor sighed. She works for me. Detective Harris looked up from his notebook. What kind of work? Victor answered smoothly. Marketing director. Harris nodded slowly. And she was near your house tonight. Victor shrugged. Apparently. Elena's voice trembled. Why would she be here? Victor turned toward her. How would I know? Harris studied both of them carefully. Do you speak with her often, Mr. Carter? Victor's jaw tightened slightly. She's an employee. Harris didn't write anything for a moment. Employees usually don't drive through their boss's neighborhood at night. Victor shrugged again. Maybe she lives nearby. Harris looked toward one of the officers. Check that. The officer nodded and stepped outside. Elena wrapped her arms around herself. Her mind was racing. Lucas was gone. The house felt colder than it had an hour ago. Harris turned back toward her. Mrs. Carter, tell me more about this Adrian Hale. Victor interrupted immediately. He's bitter. Elena looked at him. Victor continued. Their marriage ended badly. Harris asked Elena, Did he threaten you tonight? Elena shook her head slowly. No. Harris lifted an eyebrow. But you still think he might take your son? Elena hesitated. Victor spoke again. He blamed her for their child's death. Harris's pen stopped moving. Their child? Elena's voice dropped. Years ago. Harris nodded. What happened? Elena stared at the floor. An accident. Victor added quietly. Their son died. Harris studied her face. That kind of tragedy can leave people unstable. Elena whispered. Adrian never forgave me. Harris wrote something again. Victor suddenly asked, Have you contacted him yet? Harris shook his head. We will. Just then the officer returned through the door. Detective. Harris turned. Yes. Sophia Grant doesn't live anywhere near here. Victor crossed his arms. That doesn't prove anything. The officer continued. But there's more. Harris waited. Her car was spotted heading toward Highway 47. Elena looked up. The airport road. Victor looked at her sharply. Harris noticed the exchange immediately. Why would she go to the airport? Victor answered quickly. Business trip, Harris asked calmly. Tonight? Victor didn't respond. Elena's heart began beating faster. Harris closed his notebook. Mr. Carter, we're going to need a few more details about your employee. Victor's voice hardened slightly. Anand, are you suggesting she kidnapped my son? Harris shrugged slightly. Right now, I'm suggesting nothing. Elena suddenly stood up. Victor. He looked at her. What? Her voice was quiet but sharp. How long have you known Sophia? Victor frowned. Why does that matter? Answer the question. Victor exhaled impatiently. 3 years. Elena's eyes widened slightly. 3? Victor looked annoyed. Yes. Elena whispered, That's the same time Lucas started preschool. Victor stared at her. So? Elena's mind was racing now. Harris watched the tension closely. Mrs. Carter, if you know something that could help us find your son. Elena shook her head quickly. I don't. But her voice didn't sound convincing. Harris noticed. Victor noticed too. Victor stepped closer to her. What are you thinking? Elena whispered. Nothing. Victor's tone sharpened. Say it. Elena looked toward the floor again. I didn't know Sophia had been around that long. Victor laughed quietly. You're interrogating me now? Elena snapped back. Our son is missing. The room fell silent. Harris stepped in calmly. Let's stay focused. Another officer walked in from upstairs. Detective Harris. Harris turned. Yes? We checked the upstairs window. And? No fingerprints. Victor frowned. Maybe the kidnapper wore gloves. The officer nodded. Probably. Harris asked. Anything else? The officer hesitated slightly. Yes. Harris waited. The security system was turned off. Victor shrugged. Maintenance. Harris looked at him. Tonight? Victor nodded. This afternoon. Harris wrote that down. Which company? Victor hesitated, just for a moment. Elena noticed. Harris noticed too. Victor answered. Sentinel Security. Harris nodded slowly. We'll verify that. Elena suddenly felt another chill crawl up her spine. Because earlier that day, Victor had said something different. He had told her the system was acting strange. Not that a company came to repair it. She looked at him carefully. Victor avoided her eyes. Harris stepped closer again. Mr. Carter, when was the last time you saw your son tonight? Victor answered immediately. Before we left for the event. What time? Around 7. Harris nodded. And you returned home? About 9:30. Harris continued writing. That gives us a window of 2.5 hours. Elena whispered. Lucas must be terrified. Harris looked at her. We're going to find him. But Elena's mind wasn't on the detective anymore. She was staring at Victor. Because something about the way he was acting didn't feel like a father whose son had just been taken. Victor caught her staring. What? Elena shook her head slowly. Nothing. Victor narrowed his eyes slightly. You're thinking something. Elena looked away. Harris suddenly spoke again. Mrs. Carter. She looked up. Yes? You said Adrian Hale appeared tonight. Yes. Harris asked. Did he speak to you? Elena nodded. Victor turned sharply. You didn't mention that. Elena whispered. It wasn't important. Victor's voice hardened. You spoke to him privately? Harris raised an eyebrow. Privately? Elena hesitated. Victor stared at her. Harris asked again. What did he say? Elena swallowed. He said we needed to talk. Harris wrote that down. Did he mention your son? No. Harris nodded slowly. But he knew you had one? Elena hesitated again. Victor spoke sharply. Answer him. Elena whispered. Yes. Harris closed his notebook. Then Adrian Hale just moved to the top of our suspect list. Victor nodded once. Good. Elena looked at him. Something about that word, good, sounded strange. Because for the first time that night, Victor Carter looked relieved. Detective Harris stepped outside to make a call. The red and blue lights from the patrol cars flashed across the walls of the living room. Elena sat on the couch staring at the floor. Victor paced slowly near the window. Claire had finally stopped crying, but she still looked shaken. Victor broke the silence first. You should have told me he spoke to you tonight. Elena didn't look up. It happened quickly. Victor stopped pacing. What did he want? Elena sighed. Answers. Victor laughed quietly. After all these years? Elena finally looked at him. He never moved on. Victor crossed his arms. That sounds like his problem. Elena shook her head slowly. You don't know Adrian. Victor's voice sharpened. No, Elena. Apparently I don't know a lot of things about your past. The words stung. Elena looked away again. Just then the front door opened and Detective Harris walked back in. His expression was serious. Victor turned. Did you reach him? Harris nodded once. Adrian Hale? Yes. Elena leaned forward immediately. Where is he? Harris answered calmly. At home. Victor frowned. Home? Harris nodded. He's been there for hours. The room fell silent. Elena whispered, That's impossible. Harris continued. 2 officers just spoke with him. Victor's eyebrows pulled together. You're telling me he didn't kidnap my son? Harris shrugged slightly. Right now, he has a solid alibi. Elena felt her stomach drop. Victor muttered under his breath. Great. Harris studied their reactions carefully. He also seemed very surprised to hear about the kidnapping. Elena asked quietly, Did he say anything else? Harris nodded. Yes. Victor looked up. Harris continued. He said he expected something like this to happen. The room went still again. Elena whispered, What does that mean? Harris looked directly at her. According to him, someone in this house is lying. Victor scoffed immediately. That's convenient. Harris didn't react. Instead, he walked toward the window again and looked outside. Kidnappings like this rarely happen by chance. Victor folded his arms. What are you suggesting? Harris turned slowly. I'm suggesting whoever took Lucas knew exactly when the house would be empty. Elena felt her heart beating faster again. Harris continued. They knew the nanny would answer the door. Claire whispered weakly. He said there was a delivery. Harris nodded. Exactly. Victor said sharply. Anyone could guess that. Harris looked at him calmly. Not anyone. Victor's jaw tightened. You're reaching. Harris ignored the comment and looked back toward Elena. Did anyone outside the family know your schedule tonight? Elena thought for a moment. The charity organizers. Harris nodded. Anyone else? Elena hesitated. Victor noticed immediately. Who? She whispered. Victor told his office staff earlier today. Victor frowned. Because the event was public. Harris asked casually, including Sophia Grant? Victor didn't answer immediately. Harris noticed. Mr. Carter? Victor cleared his throat. Yes. Harris nodded slowly. So she knew the house would be empty tonight. Victor's voice hardened. Lots of people knew that. Harris walked back toward the couch. But she was also seen driving away from this street. Elena looked between them anxiously. Victor said impatiently, You're building a theory with no proof. Harris replied calmly, That's how investigations work. Another officer stepped into the house. Detective, Harris turned. What did you find? The officer held up a small evidence bag. Inside was a piece of cloth. This was caught on the front gate. Harris examined it carefully. What is it? Looks like fabric from a jacket. Victor shrugged. So? The officer continued. We ran it through the patrol car database scanner. Harris looked up. And? The officer answered. It matches the material used in a Sentinel security uniform. Victor stiffened slightly. Elena noticed. Harris looked at him slowly. That's interesting. Victor forced a calm expression. Why? Harris held up the bag. Because you said Sentinel security worked on your alarm system earlier today. Victor nodded. So they did. Harris asked, Did they send anyone to the house tonight? Victor frowned. Of course not. Harris looked at the officer again. Contact Sentinel. The officer nodded and stepped outside. Elena felt her mind spinning again. Something wasn't fitting together. Victor walked toward the bar cabinet and poured himself a glass of water. His movements were slow and controlled. Elena watched him carefully. Harris noticed the tension building between them. A few minutes passed in silence. Then the officer returned. "Detective." Harris looked up. "Yes?" "Sentinel Security says they never visited this house today." The room went completely quiet. Elena slowly turned toward Victor. Victor stared at the officer. "That's wrong." The officer shook his head. "Their records show no service call." Harris looked directly at Victor now. Would you like to explain that?" Victor set his glass down carefully. "Maybe the technician forgot to log it." Harris asked calmly, "Name of the technician?" Victor hesitated, just for a moment. Harris noticed. Elena noticed. Victor answered, "I don't remember." Harris nodded slowly. "Convenient." Victor's voice sharpened. "Are you accusing me of something?" Harris didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped closer. "Your security system was turned off." Victor said nothing. Harris continued. "A piece of Sentinel uniform fabric is caught on your gate." Victor's eyes narrowed. Harris finished calmly. "And Sentinel says they were never here." Elena felt a chill spread through her chest. Because suddenly, the detective wasn't looking at Adrian anymore. He was looking at Victor. And for the first time that night, Victor Carter looked nervous. Victor stared at Detective Harris. "You think I staged my own son's kidnapping?" Harris didn't answer immediately. He simply studied Victor's face. Victor gave a short laugh. "That's insane." Elena looked between them. "Victor." Victor turned toward her. "Don't start." Harris spoke calmly. "No one is accusing anyone yet." Victor gestured toward the house. "Good, because my son is missing." Harris nodded slowly. "Yes, and someone in this situation is lying." Victor's voice sharpened. "Not me." Harris held his gaze. "Then help me understand something." Victor folded his arms. "Go ahead." Harris said, "Why was the alarm system turned off?" Victor answered quickly. "I told you. Maintenance." Harris shook his head slightly. "The company says that's not true." Victor's jaw tightened. "Then their records are wrong." Harris replied calmly, "And records usually aren't wrong." Elena whispered, "Victor." He turned to her. "What?" Her voice trembled. "Why did you say the security company came today?" Victor frowned. "Because they did." Elena shook her head slowly. "You told me the alarm was malfunctioning." Victor stared at her. Harris noticed everything. Victor said sharply, "Are you siding with him now?" Elena shook her head. "I just want Lucas back." Harris stepped between them slightly. "Let's focus." Another officer walked in holding a small plastic bag. "Detective?" Harris turned. "What did you find?" The officer held up the bag. Inside was a phone. Elena gasped. "That's not mine." Harris asked, "Where was it?" The officer answered, "Under the couch." Victor frowned. "So?" The officer continued, "It belongs to Sophia Grant." Silence fell again. Victor's face changed slightly. Harris noticed. "Your employee's phone was in your living room." Victor's voice hardened. "That's impossible." Harris held the bag up. "Then how do you explain it?" Victor shook his head. "She's never been here." Elena looked at him slowly. "Never?" Victor avoided her eyes. Harris asked quietly, "Mr. Carter, are you sure about that?" Victor snapped, "Yes." Harris glanced at Elena. "Mrs. Carter?" Elena hesitated. Victor looked at her sharply. "Elena." She swallowed. I thought I saw her here once." Victor turned toward her. "What?" Elena spoke carefully. "Last month. I came home early." Victor's eyes hardened. "You never told me that." Elena whispered, "I thought it was a work meeting." Harris watched Victor closely. Victor forced a calm expression. "It was." Harris asked, "In your house?" Victor shrugged. "Agreed, sometimes business happens outside the office." Harris said nothing for a moment. Then he spoke quietly. "Interesting." Victor stepped forward. "What exactly are you implying?" Harris replied calmly. "Right now I'm implying that your employee's phone is inside your house on the same night your son disappears." Victor laughed angrily. "Coincidences happen." Harris nodded slightly. "They do." He paused. "But I don't usually believe in them." Elena suddenly spoke again. Victor, he turned toward her impatiently. What now? Her voice was shaking. Why would Sophia be here tonight? Victor snapped. She wasn't. Elena whispered. Her phone was. Victor ran a hand through his hair. Maybe she dropped it earlier. Harris asked quietly. Earlier when? Victor didn't answer. Harris continued. What, you said she's never been here? Victor looked irritated. Maybe someone else brought it. Harris raised an eyebrow. Who? Victor didn't respond. The room felt tense. Claire sat silently in the corner watching everything unfold. Harris finally spoke again. Mr. Carter. Victor looked at him. Yes? Harris said calmly. We also checked nearby traffic cameras. Victor's shoulders stiffened slightly. Harris continued. Sophia Grant's car was recorded leaving the street at 9:12 p.m. Elena looked up quickly. That's when we were driving home. Harris nodded. Exactly. Victor said sharply. That still proves nothing. Harris walked slowly closer. Actually, it proves quite a lot. Victor's voice dropped lower. Explain, Harris said. Your son disappears sometime between 7 and 9. Victor stared at him. Harris continued. In him at 9:12, your employee's car leaves your street. Elena's breathing became uneven. Harris finished calmly, and her phone is inside your house. Victor suddenly laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. You think Sophia kidnapped Lucas? Harris tilted his head slightly. Did she? Victor snapped. Of course not. Harris asked. How do you know? Victor froze for a moment, just long enough for everyone in the room to notice. Elena whispered, Victor. Harris's voice became quieter now. You answered that very quickly. Victor glared at him. Because it's ridiculous. Harris nodded slowly. Maybe. Another officer's radio crackled. Detective Harris. Harris grabbed it. Go ahead. The voice answered. We just spotted Sophia Grant's car again. Victor went completely still. Harris asked, where? Highway 47. Heading toward the airport. Elena felt her heart stop. The airport? Harris looked slowly at Victor. Victor said nothing. Elena whispered, Victor, why would she go there? Victor's face looked pale now. Harris spoke quietly. Good question. Then he added something else. Because according to the airport records, he paused. Victor stared at him. Harris finished the sentence calmly. 2 international tickets were purchased tonight. Elena's voice trembled. 2? Harris nodded. 1 under Sophia Grant's name. The room felt frozen. Elena asked weakly, and the second? Harris looked directly at Victor and said, Victor Carter. Elena stared at Victor as if the ground had vanished beneath her feet. Victor, what is he talking about? Victor didn't answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on Detective Harris. That doesn't prove anything. Harris kept his voice calm. You purchased an international ticket tonight. Victor shrugged slightly. Business trip. Elena shook her head slowly. You didn't tell me about a business trip. Victor turned toward her. Because I didn't finalize it yet. Harris lifted an eyebrow. The ticket was purchased 40 minutes ago. Victor's jaw tightened. Elena whispered, 40 minutes? Harris nodded. Right after the kidnapping was reported. Silence filled the room. Victor laughed suddenly, but the sound was hollow. That's a coincidence, Harris said quietly. You seem to have a lot of those tonight. Elena stepped closer to Victor. Why were you buying a ticket while our son was missing? Victor looked irritated. I wasn't. Harris held up a phone. The purchase was made from your account. Victor stared at the screen for a moment. Maybe someone hacked it. Harris nodded slowly. Possibly, but his tone suggested he didn't believe that at all. Elena whispered again. Victor. Victor turned sharply. What? Her voice cracked. Tell me this isn't what it looks like. Victor rubbed his temple. Elena, you're overreacting. Harris spoke quietly. Am I? Victor ignored him. Elena asked, were you planning to leave tonight? Victor sighed. I told you it was business. Elena's eyes filled with fear now. With Sophia? Victor's expression hardened. Well, that's none of your concern. The words hit her like a slap. None of my concern? Victor snapped. This isn't the time for your jealousy. Elena stared at him in disbelief. Our son is gone. Harris watched them carefully. Mr. Carter, I need you to answer something clearly. Victor looked at him coldly. What? Harris said. Did you ask Sophia Grant to come to this house tonight? Victor's eyes narrowed. No, Harris continued. Did you speak with her today? Victor hesitated. Harris noticed immediately. Mr. Carter. Victor finally answered. Yes. Harris nodded. About what? Victor shrugged. Work. Harris asked, did she know you'd be attending the charity event tonight? Victor said nothing. Elena whispered, of course she knew. Victor turned toward her. Stop talking. Harris asked calmly, why? Victor snapped, all right, because she doesn't know what she's saying. Elena stepped forward. I know enough. Victor looked furious now. Enough of what? Elena's voice trembled. You've been lying to me. Victor scoffed. Don't be dramatic. Harris interrupted quietly. Mr. Carter. Victor looked at him impatiently. Harris continued. There's something else. Victor's eyes narrowed. Harris held up another evidence bag. Inside was a small key. Victor stared at it. Harris said, this was found in Sophia Grant's car. Victor said nothing. Harris continued, it's a key to your back gate. Elena felt another wave of shock hit her. Victor finally spoke. Lots of people have keys. Harris shook his head. Not this key. Victor frowned. Harris added, it was cut last week. Victor's face hardened. Harris finished calmly. I'm at a locksmith 2 blocks from your office. Elena looked at Victor as if she didn't recognize him anymore. Why would Sophia have a key to our house? Victor didn't answer. Harris watched him closely. Good question. Just then the officer with the radio spoke again. Detective. Harris turned. Yes? Sophia Grant's car just crossed the airport exit. Elena whispered, Lucas. Harris grabbed his coat. We're moving now. Victor suddenly stepped forward. I'm coming. Harris held up a hand. No? Victor frowned. That's my son. Harris said calmly, you'll stay here. Victor's voice hardened. You can't stop me. Harris met his eyes. Actually, I can. 2 officers stepped closer to Victor. Elena felt the tension explode in the room. Victor looked around at them. This is ridiculous. Harris replied quietly, maybe. He paused. Hannah, but right now you're not leaving this house. Victor clenched his fists. Elena whispered, Victor, please tell me you didn't do this. Victor looked at her slowly. For a moment, something cold passed across his face. Then it was gone. He forced a smile. Of course I didn't. Harris watched him carefully. We'll see. Minutes later, the detectives rushed out of the house. Police cars sped down the street toward the airport. Elena stood frozen in the living room. Claire sat silently behind her. Victor remained near the window, staring into the night. Elena spoke softly. Why did you buy that ticket? Victor didn't answer. Victor. He finally turned toward her. His face was calm again. Too calm. You're letting them confuse you. Elena whispered. Then explain it. Victor shrugged slightly. There's nothing to explain. Elena shook her head slowly. Everything about tonight feels wrong. Victor walked toward her. You're tired. Elena stepped back. Don't. Victor stopped. What? Elena's voice trembled. Right now, I don't even know who you are. Victor stared at her for several seconds. Then he said something quietly, something that made her blood run cold. You'll understand soon enough. Meanwhile, across the city, a black sedan sped through the dark highway toward the airport. In the back seat, Lucas sat with his hands loosely tied. His eyes were wide. Where are we going? He asked nervously. The woman driving glanced at him through the mirror. She smiled faintly. To meet someone, Lucas whispered. My mom? The woman shook her head slowly. No. Lucas swallowed. Then who? The woman's smile grew slightly colder. Your father. Elena stared at Victor. What did you mean by that? Victor didn't answer. He simply walked past her and poured himself another glass of water. Elena's voice rose slightly. Victor. He drank slowly, then set the glass down. You're imagining things. Elena shook her head. No, I'm listening. Victor turned toward her. Then listen carefully. His voice was calm again. Too calm. I didn't kidnap our son. Elena searched his face. Then why does everything point to you? Victor sighed as if the question annoyed him. Because that detective is desperate, Elena whispered, or because he's right. Victor's eyes hardened. Be careful. Elena stepped back slightly. Careful of what? Victor didn't answer. Outside, the police sirens had faded into the distance. The house suddenly felt very quiet. Elena wrapped her arms around herself. Lucas must be so scared. Victor said nothing. Elena whispered again. If anything happens to him... Victor interrupted softly. Nothing will happen to him. Elena looked up quickly. How do you know? Victor froze for half a second. Elena noticed. Victor? He recovered quickly. Because whoever took him wants something. Elena asked. Money? Victor shrugged slightly. Probably. Elena shook her head slowly. But there was no ransom call. Victor didn't respond. Claire spoke from the corner of the room, her voice small. The woman. Elena turned. What woman? Claire looked confused. I thought I heard a woman outside? Victor's head turned sharply. You didn't say that earlier. Claire swallowed nervously. I wasn't sure. Elena asked urgently. What did you hear? Claire said, a car door and a voice. Victor frowned. What kind of voice? Claire hesitated. A woman's voice. Elena felt another chill run down her spine. Victor's jaw tightened. Meanwhile, the black sedan sped through the highway exit ramp. Sophia Grant checked the rearview mirror again. Lucas stared at her nervously. Are we almost there? Sophia smiled faintly. Soon. Lucas whispered. My dad is going to find me. Sophia's smile widened slightly. Yes. Lucas frowned. Then why did you take me? Sophia looked back at the road. Because your father asked me to. Lucas didn't understand the words, but they made him feel cold inside. Back at the house, Detective Harris's voice suddenly echoed through the hallway. Mr. Carter. Victor turned as the detective walked back inside. Elena looked surprised. You didn't go with them? Harris shook his head. I stayed behind. Victor frowned. Oh, why? Harris walked slowly into the living room. Because I wanted to ask you something. Victor crossed his arms again. Go ahead. Harris said quietly, when did your affair with Sophia Grant begin? Elena's breath caught in her throat. Victor's face darkened. That's none of your business. Harris replied calmly. Right now it is. Elena whispered, Victor. Is that true? Victor didn't look at her. Harris continued. We pulled the phone records. Victor stared at him. Harris added, you and Sophia exchanged 37 calls today. Elena felt her chest tighten. 37? Victor snapped. We worked together. Harris nodded slowly. That must be very demanding work. Victor glared at him. Harris continued speaking calmly. You also transferred $50,000 to her account yesterday. Elena looked at Victor in shock. 50,000? Victor said nothing. Harris asked quietly, what was that payment for? Victor replied coldly, none of your business. Harris stepped closer. Actually, it might explain why she's currently driving your son toward the airport. The room went silent again. Elena whispered, Victor, tell me this isn't true. Victor still didn't answer. Harris continued, there's another detail you might find interesting. Victor looked irritated. What now? Harris said. The plane Sophia is heading toward leaves in 30 minutes. Victor's expression tightened. Harris finished calmly. Destination? Costa Rica. Elena whispered, you were leaving the country. Victor's eyes flicked toward her. Don't be ridiculous. Harris added something else quietly. There are 3 seats booked on that flight. Elena felt the air leave her lungs. Year 3? Harris nodded. Sophia Grant. He looked at Victor. Victor Carter. Then he added the final name. Lucas Carter. Elena staggered back slightly. No! Victor finally spoke. His voice was cold now. You can't prove anything. Harris looked directly at him. We don't have to. Victor frowned. Harris continued. Because the moment Sophia is stopped, she's going to start talking. Victor's jaw tightened. Elena stared at him with tears forming in her eyes. Why? Victor didn't answer. Harris said quietly, That's what I'd like to know too. Victor looked toward the window again. The distant sound of police sirens was returning. Harris folded his arms. It's almost over, Mr. Carter. Victor said nothing, but for the first time that night, the calm mask on his face had begun to crack. Victor stood very still. The room was silent except for the faint hum of police radios outside. Elena stared at him. Say something. Victor didn't look at her. Detective Harris spoke calmly. Your employee is 10 minutes from the airport. Victor finally laughed softly. Then you should probably go stop her. Harris didn't move. I will. He paused. But first I want to hear this from you. Victor slowly turned his head. Hear what? Harris said quietly. Why you planned this? Elena felt her heart slam against her chest. Planned? Victor looked annoyed. You're still pushing that theory? Harris nodded once. Yes. Victor scoffed. Then you're wasting your time. Elena stepped closer to him. Victor, please. He looked at her now. What? Her voice shook. Tell me this isn't true. Victor's expression stayed unreadable. One, Elena whispered, Lucas is your son. Victor replied quietly. Of course he is. Harris said, Then explain why his name is on that flight. Victor looked at the detective. Maybe someone forged it. Harris tilted his head slightly. Your passport number 2? Victor didn't answer. Harris continued calmly. Sophia also rented a storage unit 2 weeks ago. Victor's eyes flickered slightly. Harris noticed. Inside we found a suitcase. Elena whispered, A suitcase? Harris nodded. Packed with children's clothes. Elena felt dizzy. Victor finally spoke again, but his voice had grown colder. You're building a story. Harris said quietly, Actually, you built it. Victor stared at him. Harris continued. The security system was turned off. Victor said nothing. A fake delivery was used to enter the house. Victor remained silent. Harris finished calmly. And the kidnapper left exactly when your employee drove away. Elena whispered, Victor. He still didn't respond. Harris stepped closer. The plan was clever. Victor's eyes narrowed. Harris said, Blame Adrian Hale. Victor's jaw tightened slightly. Harris continued, Let the police chase the angry ex-husband. Elena looked at Victor in shock. You told the detective about Adrian. Victor remained silent. Harris nodded slowly. That was the first thing you did. Elena's voice trembled. You were trying to frame him. Victor finally looked at her again. His face showed no guilt, no fear, just calculation. You always underestimate me, he said quietly. Elena stepped back as if the words physically pushed her away. Harris watched carefully. So you admit it? Victor gave a small shrug. Admit what? Harris said. That you arranged the kidnapping. Victor laughed softly again. You still can't prove that. Harris nodded once. Not yet. Victor looked toward the window where distant flashing lights were growing brighter again. Elena whispered, Why? Victor didn't answer. Harris repeated the question. Why kidnap your own son? Victor looked annoyed now. You're assuming I did. Harris said calmly. Your employee is driving him to a plane with your name on the ticket. Victor shrugged slightly. Maybe she misunderstood instructions. Elena's voice broke. Victor! He looked at her. She was crying now. Why would you do this to Lucas? Victor studied her for a moment. Then he said something that made the entire room go silent. Lucas wasn't supposed to be the problem. Elena stared at him. What does that mean? Victor sighed. You were. Elena felt her knees weaken. Harris watched carefully. Victor continued calmly as if explaining a business deal. You were always emotional, complicated, full of history. Elena whispered. History? Victor nodded slightly. Dead children, angry ex-husbands, guilt. Elena felt tears running down her face. That's your excuse? Victor's tone remained cold. It's reality. Harris asked quietly. So the plan was to disappear. Victor smiled faintly. Start over. Elena shook her head in disbelief. Without us? Victor looked at her as if the answer was obvious. Of course not. Elena's voice trembled. Then why take Lucas? Victor finally showed a hint of irritation. Because I needed him. Harris asked. For what? Victor replied calmly. Insurance. The word hit Elena like a physical blow. Harris's eyes narrowed. Our insurance? Victor nodded. Lucas has a trust fund worth $8 million. Elena gasped. You're lying. Victor shook his head slightly. No, Harris said quietly. That fund activates if the child disappears for 90 days. Elena stared at Victor in horror. You plan to hide him? Victor shrugged. Temporarily, Harris asked, and blame Adrian while you disappeared with Sophia. Victor smiled faintly. Something like that. Elena whispered, You're insane. Victor replied coldly, I'm practical. Harris suddenly received a message through his radio. He listened carefully for a moment. Then he smiled slightly. Victor noticed immediately. What? Harris looked directly at him. Sophia's car has been stopped. Elena's breath caught. Lucas? Harris nodded. Safe. Elena collapsed onto the couch in relief, sobbing. Victor's calm mask finally cracked. Just slightly. Harris added quietly, and she's already talking. Victor's jaw tightened. Harris stepped forward. It's over, Victor. Victor looked around the room, at the officers, at Elena crying, at the detective watching him closely. For the first time that night, Victor Carter realized there was no way out, and the perfect crime he thought he had planned had just collapsed. And if you've made it this far in the story, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, at what moment did you start suspecting Victor? Because the most dangerous villains are often the ones who look the calmest.